In this video, I'm batching out 3 of these Christmas countdown clocks using my CNC machine. By the end of the video, you'll know exactly how I made them, and as always, if you want to make them yourself, all the plans are available in the video description. Anyway, let's just jump right into it. Before even thinking about CNC Toolpaths, I want to make sure that the wood I'm using is prepped correctly. Because I'm lazy and they don't require any milling, for this project I'm using 15-inch diameter project panels that I picked up from my local Lowe's. The very first thing I do once they're back in the shop is to find their exact centers, because I'll need that location when I secure them to my machine and set my X and Y zeros. After marking the centers of 3 equal length lines that I drew across my circle, I can line up my square at a 90-degree angle, and X marks the spot. Before moving on to any painting, I do quickly sand away all of my pencil marks and any imperfections in the wood, and then make sure that all the dust is cleared. The paint that I chose to use is a white chalk paint because I think that's the best way to get the whitewashed look finish that I'm looking for. Just make sure that you're covering the front, back, and sides of these wood panels, and since this stuff dries so fast, I would suggest coming back with a second coat, but you really only need to do that on the surface that's going to be machined. Once my paint is dry and fully cured after a few hours, I come back with sandpaper, compressed air, and a tack cloth to make sure that the surface is not only clean, but also perfectly smooth in preparation for adding aura mask. Now I'm calling this aura mask, but it's really just an off-brand that I like to use, and if you want to try it out yourself, I'll leave a link to it down below in the description. If you haven't used this type of masking before, I suggest that you start with a small amount in the corner after lining everything up, and then slowly peel back the film until the entire area is covered. The goal is to have no bubbles once you're through, but that's not always possible. The good thing is you can normally fix them with the help of a rounded edged object, like a 2x4. And obviously don't forget to come back with a smaller piece and cover the bottom. If you've made it this far into the project, then you probably own a CNC machine, and you should also probably hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my projects. Anyway, let's get to clamping this on the machine. Now I could have lined up and clamped these circles to my wasteboard using the built-in fence I already have, but I decided to make this jig to make my life a little bit easier. Essentially just making a taller fence for my panel to slide into, what this jig really does is help with clamping options. Because I can easily get clamps on any of the 4 sides of the circle, for lack of a better term, it allows me to counteract any of the warp which inevitably comes from big box store lumber. Because my panels are all 15 inches in diameter, this jig also allows me to clamp them in the exact same location every time. This means that I only have to set my X and Y zero location once. That's a huge time saver since I'm batching these out, and I did end up taking some time to make sure the center was set accurately. Good thing we marked it in the beginning. I would suggest setting your Z0 height every time you switch out the panel to take account for any variations in the thickness of the wood that could affect our V-carves. But once that's done, we're finally ready to start carving. As we watch my machine do all the work, I figured this was a good time to show you all the work I did before this in terms of assigning toolpaths on the computer. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, at the link down below you'll find a free PDF instruction manual on this project that has a lot more information on this topic than given in this video. This is just a Cliff Notes version. Using a combination of the 2 CNC bits and 5 CNC toolpaths listed on the screen right now, I'm going to select different vectors within my SVG file and assign them different toolpaths. Essentially all I'm doing is using the 60-degree V-bit to get a little bit more detail in the image and text, and then coming back with the 1/8 inch downcut bit to pocket out the numbers. After about 15 minutes this carve is complete. There's really nothing complicated about it. Now we can move on to cleaning up with a wire brush and compressed air before we move on to preparation for more painting. The only preparation we need to do before we can add colors is add a few heavy coats of spray lacquer over our aura mask to help protect the carved areas and stop any bleeding that might happen in our very porous pine wood. Now let's get painting. With a small brush and acrylic paint, I can start the somewhat tedious process of painting all of these nooks and crannies with multiple different colors. Starting with black, I'm going to fill in the main body of the snowman with the exception of the vertical lines in his hat, which I want to paint purple later on. Because none of our carved areas are actually touching, I can move on to painting my text red before the black paint is even dry. And here's a good shot of my beautiful technique for painting. Just make sure everything's covered. After red comes light blue for the snowflakes, and we finish off this stage of painting with green for the perimeter numbers. From there, I think it's a good idea to use a heat gun to not only help dry the paint a little more, but also to make our aura mask a little bit more pliable, so we can move on to the next stage of removing the hat, scarf, and nose. I only want to remove these sections because I am going to paint them individually, and this process does require a little bit of finesse, so you don't get too much paint into the cracks that we already carved. Just take your time. It doesn't need to be perfect since we are going to sand after, but my only real suggestion here is to make sure that you're going with the direction of the scarf when you're painting, since this paint does sometimes show strokes. And before you finish, don't forget we still need to paint the vertical lines within his hat. But once that's done, we can let this dry overnight and finally get started on removing the rest of our aura mask, again utilizing a heat gun to help with pliability. I also strongly suggest you get one of these weeding tools. This one is from my Cricut machine, but it really helps to get all the aura mask that's in the hard to reach places. With the aura mask removed from all the nooks and crannies, I suggest that you come back with 220 grit sandpaper and sand until you get the look that you want. The longer you sand, the more paint you take away, so be careful with this. And to finally finish up this stage of the project, just spray with your desired varnish. I'm using lacquer here, and then add some kind of D-hook or hanging hardware on the back so we can hang this on the wall after we add the clock arm. Now, because I already talked about the much more complicated process of carving the clock face, all I really need to say about carving the clock arm is the fact that it's a normal carve that is zeroed in the lower left-hand corner of your machine and only uses an 1/8 inch downcut bit to perform a drilling toolpath, as well as an outside contour toolpath utilizing tabs. I did secure it to the machine with double-sided tape just in case my tabs let go, but this wasn't even necessary. Once off the machine, all I need to do is remove the tabs with a multi-tool, head over to my spindle sander to make sure everything is flush, and then apply a quick coat of lacquer to finish them off. To attach the arm to the clock face we made, all I did was add a pan head screw into the drilled hole within the arm, and screw it into place until I got my desired tightness. And with that, we can finally hang this on the wall and see how it looks. I think the answer is pretty good. Now all I gotta go do is try to sell these. Anyway, thanks for watching, and, well, wish me luck. See you next time.